Hello again. We're trying to finish up with explanation. Sometimes the most challenging part of any type of science is explaining why things occur rather than just describing them. The macroscopic world, okay, we're not going to technically explain it, but I'd like to explain it to you because it's important, hence an explanation. So, heat will be transferred because the objects are in contact. If they weren't in contact, no heat would be transferred. Second, heat will flow from the higher temperature object to the lower temperature object because of the difference in kinetic energies of the objects. So if they had the same kinetic energy, no heat would flow. Heat will always flow from the higher kinetic energy to the lower kinetic energy. So we're never going to have to write a macroscopic explanation. We will need to write an atomic one though. And this is why the particles are doing what they're doing. So first, when particles collide with different kinetic energies, the ending kinetic energy of the particles will be different due to the law of conservation of energy. Any scientific law, is just describing. Theories explain. So kinetic molecular theory explained how molecules move. The law of conservation of energy just describes that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted to different types. Since energy is conserved, so this is number 2, since energy is conserved, the original lower kinetic energy particle will have higher than before kinetic energy, and the original higher kinetic energy particle will have lower than before kinetic energy. This is always put as Ke if you haven't picked that up yet. Lastly, the kinetic energy will always transfer from the higher kinetic energy particle to the lower kinetic energy particle. So again, why does energy transfer? Law of conservation of energy, and transfers from the higher kinetic energy to the lower kinetic energy particle. So when you're trying to describe these, you always need to talk about each side. Students often will overlook and miss the other half, or just assume, well, you know it does the other. I want you to write it down because that's the only clear way I know that you know that it is all together there. So looking at the example, when colliding, so we always need to say they're colliding, they're coming into contact, the lower kinetic energy hand particles will absorb energy from the higher kinetic energy plate particles. So that shows a direction, right? It goes from the higher to the lower, because that's the start of your explanation. Use that word all the time. Energy is conserved and transfers from high kinetic energy to lower. It gives the reason of why this occurs. Now, alternatively, we could go a different direction. When colliding, the higher kinetic energy metal plate particles transfer energy to the lower kinetic energy hand particles. So you could talk about transfer or absorb. Just remember that absorbing always goes lower and absorbs from the higher. Transfer goes from the higher to the lower. It doesn't matter which one you use, they're both good. Because, again, same explanation. So you need the because and need both parts to complete the whole explanation. On to our final thoughts, the joke. Why did the hipster chemist burn his hand? Because he touched the beaker before it was cool. Answer this final question and come together before we can do some practice in class so you can get some ideas of how to properly do this. Take care. See you soon.